In developing countries, there are better reproductive health care services for girls and young women to improve their rights, chances and opportunities internationally.
Well, he's absolutely right to raise an important issue where we continue to work in countries where we can help with some of the sexual and reproductive health interventions that he describes. In addition, he will be aware that the Girls' Education Challenge is helping 1.5 million adolescent girls, often who have had children very young, to stay in education and get that education that will help improve their lifetime earnings.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you. Children's health is also a key issue, and can I thank the Department for International Development for the work that they have done to fight polio across the world. Can she rise to the challenge being set by members of the Chelmsford Rotary Clubs and Rotary Clubs across the UK and confirm that this government remains committed to ending polio forever?
Well, I always welcome the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank Rotary clubs, not only here in the UK, but around the world, for the fundraising they've done. We are nearly there. We have nearly eradicated polio from this planet, and we should thank every Rotarian for their contribution.
Good public services need an effective civil service to supervise them. What discussions has she had with the Cabinet Office and our noble Lord and friend Lord Maud about the provision of an effective civil service in developing countries?
Well, this is an area where he will be aware the UK has had long-standing partnerships with a range of developing countries. And indeed, I think it does form part of the work that we do when we award Chevening scholarships, for example, through the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and something where they have to commit to going back and helping deliver services in their country.
Gentleman member for East Londonderry is such a happy and uncomplaining fellow that the temptation to call him is irresistible. Mr. Gregory Campbell, can we have a vote on that?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister accept that one of the best ways of supporting public services, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, is to support the NGOs that provide clean drinking water there and in many of the townships across that part of Africa?
Well, I'm so glad that the honourable gentleman got to ask this question because, of course, clean drinking water is absolutely crucial. We take it so much for granted, and I am very pleased that working with NGOs, DFID has supported over 51 million people, poor people in Africa and Asia, to get access to drinking water supplies or toilets for the first time.
Only Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, public services in all countries benefit from the quality of governance and, above all, from democracy, which is why the Westminster Foundation for Democracy is very keen on having a democracy fund established. Following the very useful meeting with my honourable friend, does she agree that it's important that this is taken forward in time for the autumn spending review?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do welcome my honourable friend's bid in this session of questions. I can commit to him that these are exactly the sort of issues that will be discussed in the future spending review.
Topical question, Stephen Doughty. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the central challenge in international development going forward is going to be the quality, the expertise and the number of our permanent staff on the ground. As international development becomes more complex with conflict and climate, as we have to work more closely with other government departments, and above all, in a world in which developing countries are looking not for money but for expertise, what we will have to do over the next 15 years is increase the expertise, increase the quality, but above all the number of civil servants, moving away from short-term consultants to having British experts on the ground.
Stephen Doughty.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Secretary of State will be aware that Birmingham this week joined Cardiff, Sheffield and Tower Hamlets in calling for the recognition of Somaliland. Would he agree with me that diaspora communities here in the UK play a crucial role, not only in Somaliland but also in many other contexts in providing direct assistance, but also the type of trading, business and expert links that can help development in so many countries?
We're immensely fortunate in the United Kingdom with our diaspora community because they both provide very powerful advocacy. So the example of Somaliland, for example, on FGM, but also in relation to the expertise they provide, linguistic, deep country expertise, to ensure that our programs on the ground are of the requisite quality.
James Doddridge.
Mindful of recent outbreaks of Ebola, what lessons have been learnt to help countries become more resistant to Ebola, particularly in the health sector?
I'm lucky enough to have just returned from the Congo, where I was looking at Ebola in Beni and Butembo. The situation of Ebola in the Congo is a very serious situation. We now have...
Order. The Secretary of State is a cerebral and intellectual fellow of prodigious brain power, and he deserves a more respectful audience than he is being accorded. Let's hear the words and digest them and learn from them. Secretary of State.
What needs a hearing is not my cerebral power, but the issue of Ebola in Congo. Right, the House needs to be serious about this. There is an Ebola outbreak now in Congo that has already crossed the border to Uganda. We had an outbreak in Goma, a city of 2 million people, on Sunday. If we do not get this under control, this, which is already the second biggest Ebola outbreak in history, will cause devastating problems for the region. We must invest much more in the World Health Organization, in developing the public health services in the neighboring countries, and above all, step up to the challenge and be serious as a nation about this deadly disease.
Hanson.
1 in 10 of the world's population still don't have access to clean, decent water supplies. I know the government is trying hard to rectify this, but will you look at the article today by the Chief Executive of WaterAid calling for greater support for this area?
Provision of water and sanitation is central. It's absolutely vital for health. It's also vital in schools for ensuring that girls remain in school, and it's vital for tackling any kind of waterborne disease. So good investment in water, which is something that DFID prioritises, needs to be, along with education and health, one of the 3 fundamental pillars of development.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What assistance is being provided to the Turks and Caicos Islands, who are seeking to cope with Haitian migrants making a hazardous sea crossing and settling in that British Indian Ocean, in that British overseas territory?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this, and I'm very pleased to say that the Conflict Stability and Security Fund has been used to help Turks and Caicos repair their radar so that they're able to detect boats that may be carrying people trying to access Turks and Caicos. And he may be aware that early in 2018, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary vessel Mounts Bay was also deployed in order to provide a deterrent for those who wish to make that perilous crossing, and we will consider other ways of using CSSF in this region in the future.
Paul Blomfield.
July is set to be the hottest month ever recorded on Earth. Areas like the Lake Chad Basin, where already over 4.5 million people are displaced, are the most vulnerable to these temperatures. His ambition to double spending in the long term is admirable, but what more does he think could be done now to support those countries in the front line of the climate emergency?
So the Speaker is absolutely right. This issue of climate is now driving conflict. In the Lake Chad Basin, there simply is not enough ground now for people to feed their oxen or plant crops. We need to invest in climate resilience projects. That means looking at the crops, but also looking at conflict, looking at the reasons why there are now conflicts right the way from the Chad Basin in Nigeria, right the way across to East Africa between people with oxen and people who are planting. In particular, Sahel is now central to DFID's new initiative. We're opening embassies in Mauritania, Niger and Chad, and much more of our investment is now going to go into the Sahel region.
Bruce!
The recommendations in the Bishop of Truro's report launched this week review requested by the Foreign Secretary into FCO support for persecution of Christians worldwide will only be effectively implemented with cross-departmental engagement and support. Will DFID provide this?
Minister Baldwin.
Well, I'm pleased to add my voice of welcome to this report that was commissioned by the Foreign Secretary. She's absolutely right to highlight some of the important points that are made in the report, and she will be aware that in addition to freedom of religion and belief, the UK is helping communities, as we heard from the Secretary of State, in terms of their adaptation to some of the other drivers of conflict that have been highlighted in this excellent report.
Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Lillian Greenwood.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure members will want to congratulate all those who took part in what was a great weekend of sport. In particular, we congratulate Lewis Hamilton for his record 6th win in the British Grand Prix. And on Monday, I was able to welcome England's cricket team to Downing Street, following their brilliant performance in winning the Cricket World Cup. As I said to them, they are a team that reflects the very best of modern Britain, and a team that plays like no other in the world. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the House will want to join me in wishing all the best to the home nations taking part in the Netball World Cup in Liverpool. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in offering our congratulations, particularly to the England team who won the Cricket World Cup. We were very proud to host some of those games at Trent Bridge in Nottingham, and also our best wishes to the netball team. Notts County, the world's oldest professional football club, is facing the very real threat of extinction. Under Chairman Alan Hardy, the club has reached a financial crisis and could be liquidated before the start of the coming season. Players and staff have not been paid in weeks, and the club is set to make its 4th appearance in the High Court later this month to face a winding-up petition. Will she and the whole House join me in calling on the FA, the Football League and the National League to investigate the current situation and help secure the future of this truly historic club?
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for raising this issue? Obviously, football clubs up and down the country are of great importance to their local communities, and overall, the financial state of football clubs is better now than at any time. But the government certainly isn't complacent, and we'll continue to hold the football authorities. She's referenced various football authorities. We will continue to hold the football authorities to account for ensuring there's transparency around the ownership of clubs, sufficient inquiries of the suitability of owners are made, and financially clubs are continuing to live within their means. But I'm sure the whole House will join the Honourable Lady in hoping that as the world's oldest professional football club, Notts County resolves their situation soon.
Sir Peter Bottomley.
Can I thank the Prime Minister and her Chief of Staff, Gavin Barwell, for all that they've done with Secretary of State on residential leasehold reform, where there's a prospect of ending unfairness and ending exploitation. As another legacy, can I refer the Prime Minister to the book by Michael Gillard on the legacy to the Olympics, about Gillard's investigation into the criminals who were there? I'm not suggesting she reads it before next week, but those who do look at it should see how the Department of Professional Standards in the Met overturned the police officer who was investigating the criminals. And when they're doing that, can they look at the book by Gurpal Verdi, Behind the Blue Line, about how they managed to investigate him when they did not interview the officers who are known to have been involved in the arrests of the complainant, and they charged him with an offence with a weapon that wasn't available until 8 years after the alleged offence.
Can I say to my honourable friend, and I recognise the way in which he has championed a number of cases, and he's referenced one of them over the years in this House. Indeed, I had a number of meetings with him when I was Home Secretary in relation to that case. It is important that our police are able to operate to the highest professional standards. They have operational independence as to who they investigate and how they conduct those investigations. But I'm sure the whole House will want to say that we expect our police to conduct those investigations properly and and fairly, and to ensure that when crime is committed, they are investigating that crime.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I agree with the Prime Minister on her congratulations to Lewis Hamilton and winning on Sunday, and to the fantastic cricket team which ended up winning the World Cup, but also thanks to New Zealand as well. What a brilliant final it was, and what a great advertisement it was for the wonderful game of cricket. Mr. Speaker, time is running out on climate change. That's what the Environment Secretary said yesterday. So why did the All-Party Environmental Committee accuse the government of coasting on climate change?
The government has a fine record on climate change, including our recent legislation on net zero emissions. But there is an issue, Mr. Speaker, that needs to be addressed in this House. And before the right honourable gentleman stands up and parades himself as the champion of climate change, or the champion of the people, or the defender of equality and fairness, he needs to apologise for his failure to deal with racism in the Labour Party. Just today, 60 distinguished members of the Labour Party have written in the newspapers, "The Labour Party welcomes everyone except, it seems, Jews." This is your legacy, Mr. Corbyn. You still haven't opened your eyes. You still haven't told the whole truth. You still haven't accepted your responsibility. You have failed the test of leadership. Apologise now.
Jeremy Corbyn. Order. The right honourable gentleman will be heard. Attempts to shout down are down market, they're low grade, they're regarded with contempt by the public, but above all, they won't work. Be quiet. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, this party was the first to introduce anti-racist legislation into law in Britain. This party totally opposes racism in any form whatsoever. Anti-Semitism has no place in our society, no place in any of our parties, and no place in any of our dialogue. Neither does any other form of racism. And when 60% of Tory party members think Islam is a threat to Western civilization, and the Prime Minister has said she will act on Islamophobia within her own party, I hope she does. I look forward to seeing that being dealt with, as we will deal with any racism that occurs within our own party as well. Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Climate Change last week published its annual report, and it described the government's efforts on climate change not a bit like what the Prime Minister just said. They described it as being run like Dad's army. The government's target is to reduce carbon emissions by 57% by 2030. Can the Prime Minister tell us how much progress has been made on that?
To the right honourable gentleman on the climate change issue, the chairman of that committee said that the UK is the first major economy to set a net zero emissions target and intends to host the world leaders at next year's landmark climate conference. These are historic steps forward and position the UK at the forefront of the global low-carbon transition. But the right honourable gentleman, I note, did not apologise in response to my first questions. We deal with Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. Any allegations of Islamophobia are dealt with, unlike his way in the Labour Party, where he is failing to deal with anti-Semitism. And he can stand up and say all he likes about the Labour Party introducing anti-racism legislation. Just last week, Trevor Phillips, the former chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, said the following: Labour today presents like a textbook case of institutional racism.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, this party opposes racism in any form whatsoever in our society. And coming from a Prime Minister who encouraged the hostile environment, sent go-home vans around London, and deported British citizens, which she's now had to compensate them for, I think she might look to her own party and her own government's records as well. Mr. Speaker, the issue of climate change is obviously crucial, and we support zero emissions target. The latest figures, however, released in April, show the government is going to miss that target by 10%. The gap is widening. At the current rate, they won't meet their 2050 target until 2099. That point will be too late for our planet and our children. Clean energy investment has fallen 3 years in a row. Why does the Prime Minister think that's the case?
Still no apology, I note, from the right honourable gentleman, but we've outperformed in our first and second carbon budgets. We're on track to meet the third. We have taken the historic step of legislating for net zero emissions by 2050. We have yet to see all the policies and proposals in our clean growth strategy coming into play and having an effect on our target. This is a party that is acting on climate change. This is a party that is delivering for the people of this country. This is a party that is dealing with the issues that matter to people day to day. The right honourable gentleman needs to start dealing with the issues that matter to the members of his Labour Party, as shown in the newspapers this morning.
Jeremy Corbyn! Speaker, it was a Labour government that introduced the Climate Change Act of 2008. It's the Labour Party that is... It's the Labour Party that is committed to dealing with the issues of climate change. Can I give the Prime Minister a few suggestions why renewable investment is falling? They scrapped the feed-in tariff. Yep. They failed to invest in the Swansea tidal lagoon, and they've slashed investment in onshore wind. If we're serious about tackling this climate emergency, we need to fully acknowledge the scale of the problem. Labour is committed to measure total UK emissions. Not just what we make here, but what we buy from abroad also, so we have an accurate figure of what the emissions really are by consumption in this country. Will the Prime Minister match that commitment?
Prime Minister. The right honourable gentleman knows we measure our targets according to the international definitions of those targets, and that's exactly the right thing for us to do. But he talks about renewables. Let's just actually look at the record on renewables. Last year, renewables generated a record amount of electricity in this country, 33%. Over the last year, we've generated record levels of solar and offshore wind energy. And 99%, he talks about what the Labour government did, 99% of solar power deployed in the UK has been deployed under Conservative government.
We're actually hiding the scale of the problem by passing the buck to other countries as well. If all emissions are counted, the figures would actually be 69% higher in this country. Every year, Mr. Speaker, air pollution kills 40,000 people in this country. In 2017, the Conservative manifesto said it would promise to take action against poor air quality in urban areas. What action has been taken?
Well, can I say, first of all, to the right honourable gentleman, air pollution has reduced significantly since 2010 under the Conservatives in government, and our clean air strategy is the most ambitious air quality strategy in a generation, described by the World Health Organization as an example for the rest of the world to follow.
Jeremy Corbyn! Beautiful words, Mr. Speaker, they truly are. The only problem is air pollution levels breach legal limits in 37 of the 43 areas of this country. 2/3 of our children are growing up in an area where pollution breaches legal limits. This crisis is literally suffocating our children and damaging their health. Once again, this government is dodging its responsibility while Labour leads the way. The Mayor of London, for example, is leading the way on better air quality in the capital city. The Tories promised the greenest government ever. They've failed on carbon emissions. They've failed on air pollution. They've failed on solar. The Prime Minister says she wants action but supports fracking and has effectively banned onshore wind. The climate emergency simply cannot be left to the market. All of us need to take responsibility to secure our common future. Labour led the call to declare a climate emergency and has pledged a green industrial revolution with new jobs. When will this Conservative government face up and get a grip on this crisis and deal with it?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that we have already seen over 400,000 new jobs in the area of renewables and clean growth in this country, and we expect to see up to 2 million more jobs in that area. But I'm not going to take any lectures from the party opposite on this issue. When the last Labour government ignored advice that diesel fumes would damage our environment and incentivised diesel cars through the tax system. He talks about dodging responsibility. The person who's been dodging his responsibility during this PMQs is the right honourable gentleman. The real disgrace is his handling of racism in the Labour Party. Activists protesting, MPs leaving, staff resigning. What would his great heroes of Attlee, Bevan and Ben think? Look what he has done to their party. We will never let him do it to our country.
The Prime Minister has repeatedly made animal welfare a priority during her time. Britain leads the World Animal Welfare Protection Index. And can I thank her and the Secretary of State for supporting Finn's Law, the Animal Welfare Service Animals Act, and also for bringing forward the sentencing bill, which for a nation like ours, which loves animals, is a key measure because it will put up the maximum sentence to 5 years imprisonment. Will she do whatever more she can to ensure a speedy passage?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I first of all thank my right honourable friend, because I know this is an issue that he has been working on himself for some time, and thank him for highlighting the work that has been done. There is no place for animal cruelty in this country, and when the sentencing bill is passed, as my right honourable friend alludes to, those who mistreat or abuse animals or are involved in animal fighting will rightly face one of the toughest penalties available anywhere in the world, which cements our place as a world leader on animal welfare. And the new maximum penalty will also apply soon to those who attack our brave service animals, such as Finn the police dog, through Finn's Law. And I want to pay tribute to the supporters and those organisations such as Battersea Dogs and Cats Home and the RSPCA for championing these changes, and I wish it a speedy passage through this House and the other place.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Prime Minister finally did the right thing. When Donald Trump told women that they should go home, she called it out as unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. Donald Trump's actions are textbook racism. They are repugnant, and diplomatic politeness should never stop us from saying so. Will the Prime Minister now, on reflection, also take the opportunity to call out and condemn the racism of the go-home vans that she created in coalition government with the Liberal Democrats?
I said at the time that that was too blunt an instrument. That was dealing with... But there is an important issue here, which is that the public expect us to have a fair immigration system which deals with those who are here illegally. And that is what we need to do. And he refers to the comments made by President Trump. As he has himself alluded to, I have strongly condemned those comments made by President Trump.
Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister implemented the hostile environment policy, her party stayed silent. When she delivered the racist go-home bans, the Tories remained silent. When asylum seekers are deported to places where their lives are at risk, the Tories stay silent. And yes, Mr. Speaker, when faced with the racist columns written by the former Foreign Secretary, they stay silent. Isn't the member for Aberconwy correct, Prime Minister, when he warns that the Tories are appealing to the type of nationalism that has seen UKIP grow? While the Tory party shares more with the extremes of Donald Trump and Nigel Farage, isn't it any wonder, Mr. Speaker, that Scotland looks on in horror?
The Conservative Party is a party for the whole of the United Kingdom, and the only party in this House which is appealing to blatant nationalism is the party that wants to take
Scotland. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Shropshire, 300 doctors, surgeons and clinicians have been at the forefront of major reconfiguration and modernisation proposals for A&E provision in our county. We have secured £320 million for these vital changes, and yet Labour-controlled Telford Council, an organisation bereft of any medical expertise, has repeatedly prevented these vital changes from taking place. Will the Prime Minister update the House when this long-running saga is going to finally come to an end and my doctors and clinicians can get back to their day jobs?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I thank him for raising what is obviously a very important issue for him and his constituents, and I recognise that there are concerns about the Future Fit programme and the services in Shropshire. I understand that my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has referred this programme to the Independent Reconfiguration Panel, and the Department of Health will be studying that advice carefully before making a decision. We have a simple view that clinicians should take these decisions, because it's clinicians who know best the services that should be available for his constituents and others.
Steve McCabe. Thank you. I often disagree with the Prime Minister, but I respect that many of her intentions are honest and decent. When she raised the hopes of millions of carers by promising them a statutory leave entitlement, they were thrilled. So far, we've had reference to a committee. Is it a failed promise, or does the fact it's a manifesto pledge mean she's ensured that the honest and decent thing for her successor to do is deliver it?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that the issue of carers' leave is one on which we've been consulting. That is in the system, and I have every expectation that whoever succeeds me in this place will indeed take that forward.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, it's been remarked upon that my right honourable friend is one of only 3 Prime Ministers upon whose watch a World Cup has been brought home. She and her husband were fortunate enough to be present to watch that wonderful team effort. In the final week of her premiership, would my right honourable friend allow herself the luxury of considering that history is likely to treat her captaincy rather more kindly than it will treat those who have campaigned against her?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend and thank him. Thank my honourable friend and thank him for the support that he has shown me and the government in the work that we have been putting forward. I was very pleased to be able to be there for the whole of the World Cup final on Sunday. It was nerve-wracking, it was nail-biting, but our team brought it home, and many congratulations once again to them.
This is Sharon Hodgson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister made her first speech in Downing Street, she said she would fight against the burning injustices of inequality. 3 years on, Mr. Speaker, nothing has changed. As schools wind down for the summer holidays, many children will be excited for the fun and the joy to come. But thousands of families whose children receive free school meals will be worried about how they're even going to feed their children, let alone take them on holiday. If she wants a meaningful, lasting legacy, will she extend the holiday activity funding to ensure that all children who receive a free school meal during term time are fed in the holidays?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that we had a successful £2 million programme in the summer of 2018, and this year we are more than quadrupling this funding. Around 50,000 disadvantaged children in 11 local authority areas will be offered free meals and activities over the summer holidays. That is going to be funded by £9 million from the Department for Education. We had a good programme last year. We're expanding that programme this year because we want to help children wherever they are receive the right support in school and out.
Ed Vasey.
In the week when we celebrate the anniversary of man first walking on the moon, could I draw the Prime Minister's attention to the amazing space cluster that exists in my constituency at Harwell, with amazing companies like Open Cosmos and Oxford Space Systems. In the last week of her premiership, could she perhaps have a conversation with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority and the Department of Business? If we can accelerate the decommissioning of the land at Harwell, we can really accelerate the success of this cluster. And I will personally invite her back to inaugurate Theresa May Way when this is done.
I'm sure the Prime Minister is just beyond excited. The Prime Minister.
I was going to say, Mr. Speaker, such temptation has been dangled before me, and I thank my honourable friend for it. Can I say to him, first of all, we're very pleased with the cluster that there is in his constituency and the important role that that plays in our economy, in our research, in our science development. The Business Secretary is in the chamber and has heard the point that my honourable friend has made about accelerating this process, and I'm sure that the Business Department will look carefully at his request.
Paula Sheriff.
Mr. Speaker, passengers across the north of England are wondering which has been delayed the longest, the Northern Powerhouse or the next train. So will she and her legendary Transport Secretary use their last few days in office to justify our endless waits for relic pacer trains, while the Northern Fail franchise rewards incompetent bosses with £2 million pay packets? Or will she finally agree with our plans to renationalise the railways and run them for the public good?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, she talks about the Northern Powerhouse. The Northern Powerhouse is there. We are operating. We are putting development. We are putting funding into the Northern Powerhouse, including record levels of funding for transport across the north of England. That is the commitment this government has made. We're not just using words. We're actually putting the money in. We're seeing a difference. We're making a difference.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Ian Dukes and our local community in Redditch for raising nearly £500,000 for the Rory the Robot appeal to fund the prostate surgery robot in Worcestershire? However, despite all the hard work from the Acute Trust, the Specialist Commissioners haven't approved the business case yet. So will she use her legacy in her last week to help us sort this problem out?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? I'm very happy to congratulate Ian Dukes and all those who've been responsible for raising the money for, as I understand it, Rory the Robot. I am sitting 2 steps away from the International Development Secretary, but I gather this is a reference to medical equipment that my honourable friend has made. And obviously we will look carefully at the point she's raised about the business case.
Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the entirety of this Prime Minister's term of office, the UK has held to its 0.7% international aid commitment. Is the Prime Minister proud of this record? And will she use her powers and influence to ensure the next government holds not just to the letter of this commitment, but the spirit too?
Thanks, the honourable gentleman, for raising this issue. I am indeed proud of the role that the United Kingdom has played and the development aid that we spend across the world, helping the most vulnerable, helping some of the poorest people around the world, but also dealing with issues as they arise, like the Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Can I also say to the honourable gentleman, the 0.7% of GNI target is now in legislation, and also it was a commitment that we as Conservatives in our manifesto committed to maintain. So I'm sure that that will continue, and it will continue to be an important sign of what this government, this Conservative Party, believes we should be doing around the world in helping some of the most vulnerable and some of the poorest.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, on Saturday I met a group of residents in Harlow, many of them on government help to buy schemes who moved into homes built by Persimmon that are shoddily built with severe damp and crumbling walls. In the eyes of my residents, Persimmons are crooks, cowboys and con artists. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, hold the company to account, ensure that residents get proper compensation, urge the Chief Executive to come to Harlow to meet with these families who have suffered so much? Persimmon Homes should not behave in this way.
Well, my honourable friend has raised a very important issue, because as we increase the housing supply, it is important that the quality of new build homes continues to improve, and that we set out in our housing white paper an ambition, a target for a housing market that works for everyone. So we do expect developers to deliver good quality housing. We've already announced our intention for a new homes ombudsman to protect the rights of home buyers and to hold developers to account. We expect all developers to build their homes to a good quality standard. These are homes that people will be living in for many years. They deserve those standards.
Mr. Speaker, all the major European industrial nations insist that ships for their navies are built in their own yards. So as part of her legacy, can I urge the Prime Minister to be a good European and follow their example, and instruct the Ministry of Defence to build their new support vessels in British yards, securing British jobs and using British steel?
I say to the right honourable gentleman that, as he knows, it is this government that actually brought forward our shipbuilding strategy to ensure that we are supporting and encouraging shipbuilding around the United Kingdom. In relation to the Royal Navy, obviously the issue that he refers to is, I understand, support ships, and the Ministry of Defence is looking at the future provision of the building of those support ships in the future. We, of course, maintain our position in relation to the building of the ships of the Royal Navy.
George Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This weekend, our sporting heroes, winners and losers, inspired a new generation. Science can also inspire. 60 years ago, JFK electrified the world and united a divided and fearful nation with the inspiring Apollo moonshot programme, which also helped to defeat the Soviet Union and laid the foundations for US technology leadership. Would my right honourable friend join me in saluting our pioneering scientist astronauts Helen Sharman and Tim Peake, and agree with me that Brexit can and must be a moonshot moment for British science and innovation to tackle global challenges?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this with me? I'm very happy to congratulate and salute our pioneering UK astronauts Helen Sharman and Tim Peake. One of the first receptions I held in number 10 Downing Street when I became Prime Minister was for Tim Peake, and what was inspiring was to see the way in which what he had done in space had encouraged young people particularly to have this interest in space and in science. We're a global leader in science and innovation. We will continue to do that once we leave the European Union, and of course leaving the EU will open opportunities for UK science and innovation to tackle global challenges.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight, campaigners will be meeting in Govan to discuss direct action against the Home Office contractor Serco, who intends making 300 vulnerable asylum seekers homeless through their lock change eviction programme, many of whom have outstanding claims as asylum seekers. And as the Prime Minister will know, the Home Office can take 37 days to process Section 4 support. So will the Prime Minister intervene, stop these evictions, prevent a homelessness crisis in Glasgow and respect live legal proceedings so the law can be clarified in this regard?
I say to the honourable gentleman, we are committed to providing asylum accommodation that's safe and secure. We take the well-being of asylum seekers and the local communities in which they live very seriously. Asylum seekers who would otherwise be destitute are provided with free, fully furnished accommodation while their applications are considered, and we cover utility costs, provide a cash allowance to cover other essential living needs. But once a person's asylum claim is fully determined, then their entitlement to that support will end. What I understand has been happening is that Serco has been providing accommodation at its own expense to over 300 people who are no longer eligible for such accommodation, either because they've been refused asylum or because they've been granted leave to remain and should move on to mainstream benefits and housing.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Mr. Speaker, last week I had the honour of visiting the world's best transformer factory in Stafford in my constituency, run by General Electric. they were constructing the first of 72 transformers to go to Iraq. Now they are only able to do this through the support of UK export finance. Would my right honourable friend congratulate me? Would my right honourable friend... thing my right honourable friend should do is that, but would my right honourable friend congratulate UK export finance on backing British business?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I'm very happy to congratulate him for all the work that he has done for his constituency and more widely. And he's absolutely right. UK export finance is an essential part of the government support that can be provided to exporters. I'm very pleased that the Department for International Trade has changed the rules to enable UK export finance actually to be able to provide support for some smaller exporters, which has encouraged them. UKEF plays a vital role in our economy and in our exporting around the world, and I'm happy to congratulate them for the work they do.
I'm always happy to congratulate the honourable gentleman, as others will, for one very good reason that the public should know. The honourable gentleman invariably plays the ball rather than the man or the woman. He sticks to the arguments, and that's why he's respected not only by his constituents but across the House. Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 26th of June, this House agreed an SNP resolution regretting that her legacy will be the hostile environment. And yesterday, the all-party groups on Africa and Malawi published a report showing that structural failures in the visa system is continuing to perpetuate that hostile environment. How can her government spend millions of pounds on a global marketing campaign saying that Britain is great, when for so many academics, artists and traders from Africa, Britain is closed?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that entry clearance officers consider applications for visitor visas with the utmost rigour, because our visas are an important way of securing our border and an effective tool for us in reducing illegal immigration, tackling organised crime and protecting national security. He references visas for people coming from countries of Africa. The percentage of African nationals who saw their application granted is up by 4% on what it was 10 years ago, and is only slightly below the average rate of the last 10 years. And visa applications from African nationals are at their highest level since 2013.
Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 weeks ago, I was in New York for World Pride, a celebration of equality and love, with 150,000 people marching down Fifth Avenue, cheered on by millions of people. Then we had London Pride, and we'll have lots of other prides in towns and cities throughout the UK and Europe. But it's such a different story in so many other countries, where millions of people live in fear of prosecution and persecution. And Commonwealth countries blame British legacy legislation. What message does she have to them that they can change their laws progressively and that everybody in their countries can live in equality and harmony and love?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend, he's absolutely right, and people will have seen a wonderful Pride parade here in London, and I was only sorry I was not able to be present at the Pride reception in number 10 Downing Street. Was pleased to be able to host, that people were hosted in number 10 once again this year. He raises an important issue. It's one that I raised at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting last year, where I made it clear to countries in the Commonwealth that we want to see them introducing those progressive laws, introducing those changes in their legislation, and more than that, that we are willing to help them and provide support to them and show them how the legislation that we have used, so that they can adopt that, so that people can indeed live in true equality.
Kirsty Blackman.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claims to care about people whose lives have been destroyed by modern slavery, and she claims her work in this area will be part of her legacy. It is a legacy to be ashamed of, Mr. Speaker, as BuzzFeed News have uncovered Home Office data showing that only 16 of 326 child victims of modern slavery had their discretionary leave visas approved in the 20 months to December 2018. Refusing child trafficking victims safety, this cruel and callous hostile environment is the Prime Minister's legacy. Will she apologise or hang her head in shame?
Can I say to the honourable lady that we do, of course, constantly look at how we can improve our response to modern slavery. I'm very pleased. I had a meeting only a few days ago where I met many people involved in organisations dealing with supporting victims of modern slavery, but also those who are involved in the prosecution of perpetrators of modern slavery, and those parliamentarians who have been involved in the independent review that took place of the Modern Slavery Act. We're going to take on board most of the recommendations from that Act. But I have to say to the Honourable Lady, I make no apology for introducing the Modern Slavery Act. It was a Conservative government that actually dealt with this issue, that we continue to deal with this issue. We took it seriously when other parties were not willing to do so.
First glove!
Mr. Speaker, as a distinctly average cricketer who's fully aware of his limitations, I grew up dreaming of an England side lifting the Cricket World Cup in a Lord's final in front of a home crowd. How does she believe we maximise the opportunity of Sunday's incredible success to encourage the next generation to get involved and pick up a bat and ball?
Can I say to my honourable friend that, first of all, I think so many people around the country have been engaged and have taken inspiration from the England cricket team's success. But crucially, a very significant number of children have also been introduced to cricket. And I think that the work that takes place for cricket in the streets, for actually introducing children to the basics of cricket. I want to quote a figure which I heard yesterday, but Mr. Speaker, I do so with care, because I think it's something like 1 million children have now been seeing cricket and been introduced to cricket as a result of the World Cup tournament here in the UK. We must build on that for the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Neil Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday in Parliament, a young man named Adam, who has learning difficulties, spoke at the launch of a report from the Disabilities Benefit Consortium entitled "Has Welfare Become Unfair?" Adam told us about how, as a result of cuts to his benefit support, he has had to choose between paying to travel to his appointments and buying milk. What does the Prime Minister say to Adam, and how does she respond to that report, which says that disability benefits have been cut 4 times faster than others in the 9 years that she has been in government?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that obviously the Secretary of State has heard the specific case that he raised, but when we look at the support that we have given to disabled people and people with health conditions, it is actually at a record high. Spending on disability benefits will be higher in every year to 2023 than in 2010. And what we have also done is provided support and continue to provide support for disabled people to get into the workplace. And the number of disabled people in work has increased by almost 950,000 over the last 5 years.
Maggie through.
Speaker, this year the school sports premium is worth about £500,000 to primary schools across my constituency. It's been a key driver in helping more children establish healthier lifestyles, which they will hopefully continue into childhood. Will my right honourable friend join me in encouraging the next government to look closely at extending this funding beyond 2020 so we can help even more children become healthier for life, and also hopefully inspire some of those young people to become our World Cup winners of the future?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? She's raised an important issue. I think we all recognise the importance of sport in schools, and the Sport Action Plan has an aspiration for every child to get 60 minutes of sport and activity a day, and that's why we did publish a cross-government school sport action plan on Monday. That will be taken forward. This is an issue that Conservatives in government have taken very seriously. We're putting that PE and sport premium in. It will continue in the 2019 to 2020 academic year. Obviously, future questions about spending will be for the spending review, but I think my honourable friend can take it that Conservatives in government will continue their commitment to ensuring that we see a healthy lifestyle for young people in this country.
John McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On day-to-day issues, PM, post-Brexit concerns raised by Scotland's seafood industry, transport delays, new tariffs, taxes, put the industry simply on an unequal playing field with European counterparts. How can the PM, can she tell us how the UK government is going to support and protect this high-value industry when it faces product loss due to these delays that will certainly lead to higher and soaring insurance premiums and thresholds?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that we take industry across the United Kingdom very seriously. We have ensured, he referenced the issue of Brexit and leaving the European Union. We have ensured, that a deal was negotiated which would have protected jobs and protected industry across the United Kingdom. Sadly, the honourable gentleman and others in this House chose not to support that. I continue to believe that the best way forward for industries in his constituency and across the UK is for us to leave the European Union and do so with a good deal.
Jack Brereton. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Figures yesterday show wages are rising faster than inflation, meaning more money in the pockets of hard-working people in Stoke-on-Trent. Can I thank my right honourable friend for the action her government has been taking to help families with the cost of living, reducing taxes on income, increasing the national living wage, and increasing free fuel duty?
Can I thank my honourable friend? I think it is good news indeed. It was good news from the employment figures we saw yesterday that there are more people in work now in this country than ever before. And I'm also pleased that we have been able to help working people with their finances. We've done that through the national living wage, we've done it through cutting taxes, we've done it through freezing fuel duty. And for the lowest paid, the national living wage and the cuts in taxes mean they now take home £4,500 more than they did under the last Labour government.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At Prime Minister's questions on the 26th of June, I was pleased to hear the Prime Minister express sympathy for my 18-year-old constituent, Jake Ogborn, who has spinal muscular atrophy. In May, NICE posted a press release saying that the drug Spinraza would be made available to SMA patients, and that the clear implication was it would be made available to all of them, only for Jake to have his hopes cruelly dashed when he was told he was just outside the hitherto unmentioned eligibility criteria. This is a young man whose future is at stake. The Prime Minister said on that occasion she would follow up. Can I ask her if she has yet managed to do so?
Can I say to the honourable lady, I don't have a response to the specific case that she has made, raised again, but I will ensure that a response comes to her before I leave office.
Thank you. Order. Order come after urgent questions, of which there are 3. Order. Urgent question. David Davis.
To ask the Minister for the Home Department to make a statement on the Home Office's policy on police surveillance of journalists.
Minister Nick Hurd.
Mr. Speaker, it cannot be said enough, but the government is committed to protecting the free press and freedom of expression in this country. The government agrees, indeed it forcefully advocates, that confidential journalistic material and journalists' interaction with their sources must be protected. But, Mr. Speaker, that does not mean that a journalist should receive blanket protection from legitimate investigation simply because of their chosen profession. Our security and intelligence and law enforcement agencies will, in very limited circumstances, have a legitimate need to investigate a journalist or their source. But there need to be protections around that. And the Investigatory Powers Act, we believe, does provide strong protections in relation to the use of investigatory powers for the purpose of identifying or confirming a journalistic source and for the obtaining of confidential journalistic information. This ensures, Mr. Speaker, that protections are applied where they are required, and that those who commit a crime or pose a threat to national security can be investigated regardless of their chosen profession. And it does so, we believe, in a way which is compatible with all of our ECHR obligations. For example, Mr. Speaker, where a targeted communications data authorisation under Part 3 of the Act is made with the purpose of identifying or confirming a source of journalistic information, Section 77 of the Act requires that, other than in threat to life situations, the authorisation must be approved by a judicial commissioner before it can take effect. In deciding whether to approve such an authorisation, the judicial commissioner must have regard to the public interest in protecting the sources of journalistic information and the need for there to be another overriding public interest before a relevant public authority seeks to identify a source. Mr. Speaker, the codes of practice under the Act provide detailed and extensive guidance to public authorities when applying the powers in the Act, including extensive guidance on when those safeguards should be applied.
David Davis. Speaker, one of the worst things a government can do to damage democracy is to undermine freedom of the press. In the last week, there have been numerous press reports of the police using, and I quote, the full force of the state, unquote, to pin down the source of the recent leak of diplomatic telegrams. According to the reports, this includes analysing mobile phone data in journalists' phones, including location data showing everywhere they've been in the previous weeks. If true, this would be an astonishing intrusion on press freedom because it puts at risk every single confidential source they had, not just the one the police may be looking for. Now, since the successful court case brought by the Right Honourable Member for West Bromwich and myself against the government, the Data Retention Investigatory Powers Act has been tightened up and journalists get particular protection in it. So there are only two ways, really, that such intrusive surveillance could legally be carried out. One is for the police to have obtained a warrant on national security grounds, in effect. Given the fact the government did not even use the DA procedure to prevent publication of these telegrams, didn't even use the procedure available to it, it's very unlikely that such a warrant would have been granted or such an agreement be given by a commissioner. And the other way is for one of the state agencies, the secret agencies, to have obtained the data. And given the leak was embarrassing, but not a threat to national security, this also seems unlikely. So can the Home Office Minister reassure the House that these intrusive surveillance techniques were not used against journalists in this case, and that they would never be unless there was either a serious crime or a real and serious threat to national security?
Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend is a long-standing champion of civil liberties and press freedom. In fact, probably there is no greater one in this House, and I'm grateful to him for the UQ and the opportunity to place on record again, because as I said, it can't be said often enough, the absolute commitment of the government to protect the freedom of the press. It stands at the cornerstone of our democratic process, and he's heard that from the Prime Minister, the two men who want to be the next Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, and anyone else at a microphone. That is entirely sincere. He's also quite right to point out that the Investigatory Powers Act is has been subject to a tightening up process, in large part stimulated by the promptings of himself and other colleagues. And the point I was trying to stress in my remarks to him is that we do believe, and although and that is being challenged and will be continued to be challenged by people who take a different view, that the safeguards in place and the protections that are in place and what is required by our security, intelligence and law enforcement agencies to go through in terms of, for example, seeking a targeted communications data authorization are extremely stringent and do need to go authorizations in this case need to be approved, as he said, by the Judicial Commissioner. The government of the day of any colour needs to be subject to scrutiny and challenge on the robustness of these approaches. I'm not going to comment on the specific case. I am here simply to set out the process in relation to the protections that he and others quite rightly seek to be reassured by, and I hope I have done that.
Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. the press freedom is an integral part of democracy. We don't have too much freedom of the press in this country. We have too little. Can it be right that the press is threatened for publishing a material that is in the public interest? The illegality in leaking the British ambassador to Washington's thoughts may be tested in the courts. So I want to be cautious about any remarks on that. But surely it cannot be illegal to publish those remarks simply because they are the cause of embarrassment to the government. Surely it cannot be right that scanning technology is being used against journalists to investigate the leak. Is it open to the Home Secretary to issue guidance to police forces in this matter to ensure that there is not now nor in future this trolling of journalists' phones, laptops, and other devices? In another case earlier this month, the Belfast High Court declared that the warrants authorizing the search and arrests of 2 documentary filmmakers were unlawful, and that everything seized from the filmmakers must be returned. The filmmakers have previously released a documentary about a mass killing in Northern Ireland for which no one has ever been charged, no stones unturned. The Belfast High Court was surely right, but this case highlights the need for greater judicial oversight of the police and the security services, especially when it comes to their dealings with the press.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that. I'm sure he'd want to make clear on behalf of the opposition that the opposition entirely support the police in terms of their ability to get on with their work and identify the leaker. The police certainly have our full support on that, because those leaks should not have happened. They have been damaging, and I'm sure everyone wants to see the leaker identified. He will also, I'm sure, having done his homework, be aware of what the Official Secrets Act says, in particular Section 5, and that's how the law stands at the moment. But what is critical, and I'm delighted to be able to come to the House again to make that clear, that in going about their business on our behalf, the security, intelligence and law enforcement agencies need to jump through some very significant hoops and go through very robust processes, including, as I've stated in the case of where they are seeking a targeted communications data authorization, that must be approved by a judicial commissioner before it can take effect. We are satisfied, but must always be open to challenge, that those processes, those safeguards, those checks and balances are robust. Frankly, we operate in a vibrant democracy where in this place we always, in my experience, have vigorous debates around these balances and the need for safeguards and the debates around pushing back on the powers of our law enforcement agencies. In other countries, those debates do not take place. It's a symbol and a sign of I think, the health of our democracy. And I'm sure at the end of this, UQ, that the House and the public watch it will be in no doubt about this House commitment to the freedom of the press.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the government on the organisation of last week's excellent Global Media Freedom Conference? But does he agree that the UK needs to be doing a lot more to improve on our present ranking of 33 in the World Press Freedom Index? Does he recognise that the concerns expressed by my right honourable friend make that harder to achieve? And also, these concerns risk being exploited by other countries who do not protect media freedom and are only too keen to lock up journalists.
Well, I accept all that coming from the authority of a highly distinguished former Secretary of State. I am entirely sincere, as are my colleagues, in taking this opportunity to reassert the importance of the freedom of the press and the protection of media freedoms. But we can't, in that process, allow any sense that there is a blanket protection from legitimate investigation simply because of someone's chosen profession. You know, the processes need to be robust, open to kind of criticism and debate, but the primacy of free press and freedom of expression in this country is absolutely central to our democratic process.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Halton, Price and Howden in securing this question? It is indeed ironic that we are discussing these matters the week after the British government hosted the first global conference for media freedom. The Foreign Secretary has spoken about convening a panel of experts to advise countries on how to strengthen the legal protection of journalists. On the evidence of some of the statements made over the last few days, the convener of that panel might be best to start close to home. Now, the SNP have made very clear that we deplore the diplomatic leaks as unacceptable and that they should be investigated. However, in times of crisis, we need to remember that we must uphold human rights, particularly press freedom. I do wonder, Mr. Speaker, whether there were any official secrets in the ambassador's leaked comments. It's hardly a secret that Donald Trump is inept. And the police really ought to understand that the Official Secrets Act is not there to protect the government from embarrassment. I'm sure they do, and if they don't, they'll be reminded by those who give them legal advice. But can I ask the Minister this? Who escalated these investigations to the police and why? Was it, as some newspapers have reported, at Downing Street? And if an offence has been committed and the police are to be involved, wouldn't they be better employed catching the leaker rather than shooting the messenger?
What I say to the Honourable Lady, she's quite right, as my right honourable friend said before. I take it as something to be very proud of, that the British Foreign Secretary has chosen the championing of media freedom as being one of his core campaigns and taking that message around the world. The Official Secrets Act is not there to protect the government from embarrassment. It is there for all the reasons that we know. What I would simply say to her is that, you know, my understanding and my desire is for the police to be able to get on with their job and identify the leaker. That is their primary objective.
Richard Drax.
May I just add a little bit more to the point just made, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, and ask why the police were brought in. As a former journalist myself for some 17 years, we rely on sources, of course, to give the news to the public. If every time there's a leak, and let's face it, there have been leaks before and there'll be leaks afterwards, and this leak was embarrassing, it was nothing to do with the defence of our country, and the police are going to be called in, then every journalist in the country is going to fear that their newsroom will be full of officers in blue every time a story that potentially hurts someone in power is published.
Well, I understand the point my honourable friend is making. I understand that the comments from the Met have generated ripples, but this was a serious leak, and I think it is entirely appropriate that the police should look at it seriously, and I hope he will support me in wishing them every success in doing their job, which is to find the leaker. I don't interpret anything in what has been said other than being a clarification of the law as it stands. But I hope he will join me in that determination that we identify the source of this damaging leak.
Who's next? Andrew Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a big difference between targeted collection of evidence as pursuit of serious criminal offences and a fishing expedition where government embarrassment is one factor there. And this seems rather too near to the second of those. Yeah. Never mind journalists, the general public are concerned about the way that the state and other agencies are able to collect data on them now. And shouldn't we be on the public side here? And shouldn't the government be publishing in a readable and accessible form what people's rights to privacy are and what rights the state has to intrude on that?
I'm all for more transparency, and I hope we're all on the side of upholding the law. What I've been trying to set out, in I hope a reassuring way, is that there are very robust safeguards in place where our law enforcement agencies are seeking specific powers, and those, the guidance and the codes around that are very explicit and extensive in terms of protecting journalists.
Well, Blackman. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for the answers he's given thus far. The concern we have here in terms of a balance between the police duties and also the freedom of the press is clearly vitally important. But can he reassure this House that the police are not interpreting their role in a widespread manner and therefore snooping on journalists that have nothing whatsoever to do with the investigation of this particular leak?
My honourable friend and parliamentary neighbour for that. I have absolutely no evidence to suggest that what he fears is the case. What I believe and wholly endorse is a very focused police effort on this specific investigation to identify the leak.
Peter Carr. Thank you, Speaker. I was on the Investigatory Powers Bill Committee, and one of the most contentious areas of debate in that period was about public interest. Can the Minister tell us, when the Judicial Commissioner makes a judgment based on public interest, what does he do and his department do to make sure that that interpretation is a correct one and is appropriate to the time and is also accountable to this House?
Well, I think there's a great deal of guidance around this subject, but he's right, and I'm happy to repeat this point because, and I thank him for his work in that in that scrutiny. But we make it quite clear, deciding whether to approve an authorisation, for example, for a targeted communications data authorisation, the Judicial Commissioner must have regard to the public interest in protecting the sources of journalistic information and the need for there to be another overriding public interest before a relevant public authority seeks to identify a source. That is explicit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But the Minister must surely agree that part of the problem here is the application of technology, and particularly automation, to police powers without the appropriate protections or even public debate. Now, we might understand the need for a particular warrant for specific documents in the case of criminal activity, but the automated blanket trolling of all emails, locations and conversations for all journalists is clearly inappropriate. And it's not only journalists who may be targeted. The rest of us deserve protection too, from digital surveillance, video and voice recognition. So does the Minister not agree that we need a charter of digital rights for all of us as Labour advocates?
Well, if she's talking specifically about examination of data under a bulk acquisition warrant, for example, if I understood her correctly, again, I would point to our whole set of codes and guidance and processes and safeguards in relation to that. If she's talking about the broader issue around the application of technology and artificial intelligence to the working of our law enforcement agencies, she's entirely right that as we stand on the brink of, frankly, a revolution in terms of what technology can enable our law enforcement agencies to do, then that needs, as citizens, we need that to feel comfortable with that, we need to have confidence in that, and need to have the appropriate legal and regulatory environment around it, which is what we believe we have.
Mr. Newlands, I thought you were seeking to take part.
Take part, Mr. Speaker. I certainly was, Mr. Speaker. I was going to bob in a second, but I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for your observation, Mr. Speaker. I was also on the Investigative Powers Bill Committee, and during the progress of that bill, the then Solicitor General said that we're absolutely committed to the preservation and protection of a free press and freedom of expression in our democratic society. That includes the ability of sources to provide anonymous information to journalists, which is absolutely vital if we are to have throughput of important information that needs to be in the public domain. But so, given events in recent days, can the Minister advise us what's changed in government policy?
Hear, hear.
Honestly, I hope his knees are all right. I don't honestly think there has been a change in government policy. What I've set out is the processes around the Investigatory Powers Act, which he and other colleagues have helped to shape and toughen. He'll know better than me that those processes are now robust. I don't see any change in government policy in that respect. I think the police are complying with with those processes.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member for bringing this to the House's attention, because it is vital. I'm being concerned. The Minister has said on more than one occasion, that while he values press freedom, that an individual should not have protection from legitimate inquiry simply because of the profession they chose. But that profession, the very purpose of it is to scrutinise government, to ensure that human rights are adhered to in this country and that civil government procedures are followed. So would the Minister not accept that we do need something from the government to ensure that, with the advances in technological scanning and tracking, that journalists are protected in providing that valuable public service?
I think journalists provide an incredibly important service in our democracy, and I'm entirely sincere in everything that I've said. But I'm sure that she's not suggesting that simply because someone is a journalist, they are above the law, receive blanket protection from legitimate investigation in very limited circumstances. What we need, though, is for the right processes, the right safeguards, the right checks and balances in place, the right challenge, frankly, on the law enforcement agencies if they are seeking authorisations to pursue investigation. And what I've set out is what I believe, through the Investigatory Powers Act, is a robust process.
Peter Grant.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is that these are powers that were given to the police and the security services to allow them to prevent and detect serious crime. Yeah. There is no suggestion that a serious crime has been committed. There is absolutely no suggestion that those that are now being put under random widespread surveillance committed a crime. If a crime is committed, it is committed either by a civil servant or by a Member of Parliament. We obviously can't know for certain whether the reports that the Right Honourable Member referred to have any accuracy to them. But if they do, then they point to a situation where the police are using their powers not to prevent serious crime, but to intimidate and harass journalists whose job it is to hold the police and us to account. Can the Minister undertake to carry out a review, reporting in Privy Council terms if necessary, into the action the Met Police have taken, so that this Parliament can be the final arbiter as to whether the powers that we agreed to give to the police are being abused in this instance?
Well, I think it's wrong for the House to speculate, and certainly for a Minister to speculate on the outcome of this particular investigation. I think we need to let the police get on with their work. They and others will have heard very clearly the messages of concern from the House on this subject. I come back to the point. We have together, through the Parliament, set up a robust process of check and balance on police processes, which I do believe is robust.
Thank you. Order. Urgent question. Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Foreign Secretary to provide an update on the case of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe.
Minister of State Dr. Andrew Mearson.
Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe's family have told us that she was admitted to a psychiatric ward in the Imam Khomeini Public Hospital on Monday. Her family have yet to be allowed to visit her in hospital or to make phone calls. We are lobbying the Iranian authorities to ensure her family are able to visit her as soon as possible, as well as continuing to lobby for consular access so we can check on her care as a matter of urgency. We remain in close contact with her family, both in Tehran and in London with Richard Ratcliffe. The Foreign Secretary spoke to the Iranian Foreign Minister on Saturday, the 13th of July, and raised Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe's case and that of other dual nationals detained in Iran. The Foreign Secretary made clear, as he has in public, that innocent people in prison must not be used as diplomatic leverage, and called for their release. I also raised the case in a recent visit to Iran. The Foreign Secretary has exercised diplomatic protection in March 2019, and we will continue all we can to reunite Nazanin and her family. The government lobbies strongly on behalf of all our dual national cases, including Mrs. Zaghari Ratcliffe, at the highest levels. The welfare of British nationals in detention is a high priority for us. We have made clear that Mrs. Zaghari Ratcliffe must be treated humanely and in line with international standards and norms. And if I can say, just on a personal note as a parent, this case has rightly gripped the hearts of the British people. And I hope this development is the first step in a brighter future for Nazanin and her family. I hope that Iran will be generous and humane in their approach to this family that have been separated for far too long, and that we can rely on elements within Iran which we know are decent and civilized, and that they will apply international norms and behaviours in respect of this sad case, and that Nazanin and her family can be brought together as soon as possible.
Thank you. Tulip Sadiq.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for granting this urgent question, and I'd like to take this opportunity to personally thank you for making the time to go and visit Richard Ratcliffe, Nazanin's husband, when he was on hunger strike outside the Iranian embassy 2 weeks ago. And indeed, I'd like to thank all members across the House. There were over 100 MPs who went to visit Richard Ratcliffe while he was on hunger strike, sending a very strong message to Iran that while they may continue to abuse Nazanin's human rights, we will not stand for it, and we will be listening and protecting her. And I'm pleased to say her husband, Richard, is in the gallery today. I bring this urgent question today because my constituents' plight is urgent and desperate. On Monday, handcuffed and shackled at the ankles, Nazanin was taken from her cell in Avon Prison to a psychiatric ward in Imam Khomeini Hospital in Tehran. The reasoning for this move has not been made clear to her lawyers or indeed to her family. She has not been allowed to update her family either by phone or by seeing them through visits, and we have no idea how she is being treated. Her family have been shut off, her ward has been sealed off, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are not allowing any human contact with Nazanin at this moment. The family fear that she may be drugged or being tortured and may be forced to sign a confession to unnamed crimes. As most members across this House, and indeed you, Mr. Speaker, will be aware, Nazanin is a young mother from West Hampstead in my constituency. She was on holiday in Iran when she was imprisoned and illegally abducted and kept in solitary confinement for many months before being allowed visits to her family. She has lost 3 years of her life to this hell, and with her sentence having been increased due to extra charges brought against her, her future does seem bleak. With this in mind, I want to ask the Minister a few questions. Number one, what urgent steps is the government taking to establish what treatment Nazanin is receiving right now? Secondly, what protests have the government made regarding the fact that Nazanin was shackled like a caged animal on her way to receiving urgent medical care? For the first time in 100 years, the government has offered Nazanin diplomatic protection and has escalated her case to a country-to-country dispute, for which we are grateful and her family is grateful. With this in mind, what further steps has the government made to secure Nazanin's freedom? And finally, 1 week ago, the British Royal Marines impounded the Iranian tanker Grace 1 off the coast of Gibraltar. What is the Minister's assessment of comments made by the Iranian Supreme Leader, who said that, I quote, "committed force will not leave this evil without a response"? Does he share my concern that this retribution may be targeted at my constituent Nazanin? I ask these questions not because I doubt the current Foreign Secretary's sincerity when he says he cares about my constituents' freedom, and I know that he has made time to meet with the husband of Nazanin and the family and has taken time to speak to me personally as well. But I say this because the time for sentiment is now over. This has gone on for too long, and we need to see decisive action right now, today.
Minister, Dr. Murison.
Can I say that the Honourable Lady's question and the way in which she has put her remarks today do her great credit, and the work that she does for her constituent is admirable. We are, of course, seeking consular access. We have sought consular access from the beginning in this case. We believe that since circumstances have changed, consular access now needs to be granted urgently. But more importantly than that, we want to ensure that Nazanin gets access to her family. She will be in contact with the family, as are we, and that is the best way we have of determining the status of Nazanin right now. And it would be indeed cruel to deny this lady in a psychiatric ward of a public hospital access to her family. That must happen immediately. I deplore the maltreatment of prisoners wherever it occurs, and the description she has given is completely unacceptable. It is completely contrary to any international norms. And she will understand that the Iranian system is multifarious, and we would be concerned about exactly who is controlling the situation as far as Nazanin is concerned. And I want to appeal to the better nature of people in Tehran to do what is right for Nazanin. I think that's vitally important. She touches upon Grace 1. She will anticipate my answer. This is primarily a matter for the Gibraltarian authorities, who are exercising a matter of law under EU sanctions. I do not believe the two are directly linked. However, it's certainly the case that we need to ensure that there is de-escalation in relation to our interaction with Iran right now, in Gibraltar and in the Gulf. And when I visited Tehran recently, de-escalation was absolutely my message. And were we to approach something that looks like normality in relation to our access to this particular piece, I think all sorts of things are possible. But I would sincerely urge our interlocutors in Tehran to approach this on the basis of decency and humanity, so that Nazanin can be given the treatment that she undoubtedly requires, but in a proper setting and using proper norms and practices.
Well, Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, I was humbled to host a human rights conference on human rights in Iran, and Richard Radcliffe was one of the speakers. He made the request that all he wanted was his wife to be returned so they could be a family again. We also heard from the UN Rapporteur on Human Rights in Iran, who talked about the widespread abuses of human rights in Iran. This weekend I was at a conference where I heard at first hand the abuses that many people have suffered on human rights in Iran. Can my honourable friend therefore provide some action that we can take as a country to restore Nazanin to her family? Because the reality is that the Iranians only understand one thing, and that's firmness. And we are seen at the moment to actually not be taking a firm enough stance.
I think my honourable friend will understand that the tools in our toolbox are somewhat limited. Iran is an independent and proud nation that has its own view of its place in the world and does require us to show some respect to it. But we need to deplore the things that it is doing in respect of the victims of human rights abuse, which in Iran are particularly acute. And clearly the UK government uses every opportunity it can to impress how unsatisfactory we regard Iran's approach to human rights is. However, we also need to ensure that Nazanin comes home. That is our principal priority in this matter. And I do appeal to Iran, not least because its reputation in a country like this one is being severely damaged by this, to do the decent thing. They must look at this in a sympathetic light and do what is right and proper and humane in respect of Nazanin, particularly since she's now been moved to the Imam Khomeini Hospital, where she's being treated. We want to know how she's being treated, whether she's being given the right treatment and in what context. And above all, she must have access primarily to her family, but also consular access, and we'll be able to make a better judgment on where we are with this.
Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. And let me not just congratulate the member for Hampstead and Kilburn on securing it, but let me also join the Minister in applauding her and thanking her on behalf of the whole House for the outstanding passion and persistence that she has brought to the fight for Nazanin's freedom. She is an outstanding backbencher. But, Mr. Speaker, for all of us who've taken part in that fight, for all of us who visited Richard Ratcliffe during his recent hunger strike outside the Iranian embassy, the developments that we've seen over the past 24 hours are deeply troubling. The fact that Nazanin is back under the control of the Revolutionary Guard, being held in isolation and denied access to consular staff and her father, have rightly raised concern that she may be being pressurised to sign a false confession. Because we all know that the hardline theocrats around Khamenei, who have been responsible for Nazanin's arrest and detention and her appalling treatment in custody, don't care about the truth of Nazanin's case, the reality of her innocence, or the mental and physical cruelty that's been inflicted on her. They only care about exploiting her and lying about her to support their doctrine of embattlement and isolationism and undermine the Rouhani government's strategy of engagement. Exactly the same individuals who have revelled in the collapse of the Iranian nuclear deal and who are willfully risking conflict with their actions in the Strait of Hormuz. So on a practical level, can the Minister tell us today what is being done to engage with the figures around Khamenei, not just the Rouhani government, around Nazanin's case? And finally, on a wider level, does he agree with me? And does he not just agree with me? In fact, does he agree with the veteran BBC correspondent John Simpson, a man with better insight than most of us put together on matters of diplomacy and foreign policy, that there are two villains in this terrible situation? Because as John tweeted this morning, Nazanin is both, I quote, the victim of a campaign by political extremists in Iran and of the carelessness of Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary. So will the Minister agree with that verdict and condemn the former Foreign Secretary and our next Prime Minister for handing Iran's hardliners their biggest excuse, their biggest piece of propaganda to justify this horrific injustice to one of our own citizens?
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady has elegantly dissected the Iranian state in a very few minutes, and I think she probably puts the finger on it. Because, of course, anybody with any experience of Iran will know that there are many Irans, and I've already touched upon that in my remarks. Of course, we are concerned by any access that the IRGC has to this particular case. I would say, though, that the IRGC does care about its reputation. It certainly cares about its country's reputation, and so does the Supreme Leader. And I think it's that reputation that hangs in the balance. And I think the generosity and humanity for which Iran has historically been associated would be amply demonstrated if they were to do the right thing in respect of Nazanin. And I urge them to do that, if not on Nazanin's behalf, then on behalf of their country's reputation, which is rightly important to them. She asked how close we are to the Supreme Leader, and again, she knows very well, because she's a student of these things, that access to the Supreme Leader is exceptionally difficult. But we have spoken to President Rouhani, and we routinely engage with our ministerial interlocutors, Minister Zarif, and in my case, Minister Araghchi, and will continue to do so. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Iran, of course, is somewhat separate from the organisation that she has cited, the IRGC. And it's important, I think, just to reiterate, that we do also ensure that the IRGC kind of gets the message that the eyes of the world are on Iran in respect of this case. And if it continues to behave in the way that it does, it tramples all over the good opinion that its international observers might have, even now, of Iran, and it'll do Iran and its people no good at all.
Patrick Grady.
Speaker, I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Hampstead and Kilburn as well on securing the question, and you for granting it, Mr Speaker. And she knows, and the family will know, that they have the full support and solidarity on these benches. And it was indeed a privilege to meet with Richard when he was campaigning outside the Iranian embassy, as did many of my colleagues, including our leader, my right honourable friend for Ross Skye and Lochaber. This move into hospital is a very worrying new turn of events, and it does raise serious questions about Nazanin's well-being and a particular concern at the risk of her being forced into signing some kind of false confession. So, as other members are saying, is the UK Government satisfied that it is exhausting every possible avenue to rectify this situation? What is the point of diplomatic protection if it can't prevent this kind of development? And can he state unequivocally that the UK Government's commitment to freeing Nazanin goes beyond any particular set of personnel or ministers, and that freeing Nazanin must be a top priority for the next Prime Minister, whoever that might turn out to be?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that. Nazanin has been transferred to a public hospital. Nazanin certainly does need medical treatment, and we've been calling for that for a very long time. However, if she doesn't get the treatment that she requires, and if she's abused in hospital, or if the purpose of transferring her to hospital is to abuse her further than has been the case already, that would be a cause for utter condemnation, as would any forced confession. I think we flagged this up pretty well today, if I may say so, Mr Speaker, and in the event that a confession is obtained from Nazanin, the international community is perfectly entitled to question it, to put it very mildly indeed. He asked me to establish the top priorities of the incoming Prime Minister. I think he can be absolutely sure that one way or the other, Nazanin will be at the forefront of the minds of whoever is successful in this particular contest next week.
Order. Further exchanges will unfold, but at this point I would just like to say that I think all members who visited you, Richard, when you were outside the Iranian embassy on your hunger strike, will have regarded it as a very great personal privilege and honour to have visited you. So although people tend very courteously to say, oh, it's good of this member or that member to find the time in a busy schedule, I don't think that we view it in those terms. We saw it, as I say, as an honour to visit you. And I'm going to say to you very publicly what I have said to others and what I said to you, that I was struck by your quite extraordinary stoicism and forbearance, a standard to which, in such circumstances, any of us could aspire, but I suspect none of us would attain. It really was a very humbling experience. In my case, of course, I had the pleasure not only of meeting you for the first time and of engaging with you, but of meeting your sister and your mum to boot. And I want you and all of your family and your precious daughter to know that you will never be forgotten. And the Minister has treated with these matters already in the most sensitive terms, and other colleagues have done so, for as long as it is necessary for this matter to be raised, as it has been by the Honourable Lady for Hampstead and Kilburn, with persistence and passion, it will be raised. This matter, the Iranians need to know, will not go away until mother and daughter, mother and wife and husband are reconciled so that they can live as one. I also want to mention what I've just been told by the Honourable Lady, the member for Neath, which is that 13 of her constituents, 13 wonderful women, whom it is said, wholly implausibly to me, are of an average age of 80. No. I can't see any such people in the gallery, have made a special visit to the House today to observe our proceedings. They, together with everybody else, should be warmly welcomed. I hope you are witnessing the House at its best, treating of an extremely serious matter and on a cross-party basis, because it isn't about party politics, it is about humanity and the requirement for the display of humanity in the conduct of public affairs. Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would first of all congratulate the Honourable Member for Hampstead and Kilburn for securing this urgent question and for the powerful way which she has been an advocate for Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, her constituent. And I thank the Minister for his efforts and those of the current Foreign Secretary in trying to secure Nazanin's release. The way in which this mother is separated from her daughter is something which we can all only imagine the anguish and hope that that can be swiftly resolved so that that family can be reunited. And so I asked the Minister not only what can he do to bring that about, but also on the wider issue of this disturbing trend of Iran arresting people on trumped-up charges, effectively then becoming hostages to geopolitical disputes in which they have nothing to do. That behaviour is entirely unacceptable as a tactic. As the Minister says, it risks huge reputational damage to the state. And so what more could this government do, perhaps through the auspices of the United Nations, to raise that wider issue and increase and crystallise to the Iranian state and any others who would wish to undertake this tactic, that this is something which is counterproductive and not acceptable?
Well, I think we've made it very clear that this is not acceptable. That is to put it mildly indeed. And I don't think the international community can be left in any doubt as to A, the importance that we place on this, and B, the views of like-minded countries in respect of this. And I really would appeal to Iran just to consider what this is doing to their reputation. Nazanin has been wrongly imprisoned. She's been maltreated in an extremely serious way, as have her family. And the right thing to do now is to reunite Nazanin with her family as a minimum, to ensure they have immediate access to Nazanin and that they are able to make phone calls with her, so we can try and bottom out exactly what is happening, whether she is getting the treatment that we have long been calling for. There are other issues, of course, that prey on the minds of the United Nations right now in respect of Iran and its behaviour and its destabilising actions in the wider Gulf region. I rather suspect in further questioning this morning we might return to those.
Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And could I thank the Minister in advance of tomorrow's meeting with myself for a constituent who's in a similar position to Nazanin? And could I ask on the wider implications question, is there any movement at all on the question of the deal and the notion that the European Union could help with the Instex approach to providing some kind of outlet for some of this frustration so that there is a way for Iran to fix some of its economic problems and therefore have more of a dialogue with countries like the UK?
Yes, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I look forward to meeting her tomorrow. I hope that JCPOA is capable of being advanced. I hope we are not seeing the end of JCPOA. It is a credible mechanism for encouraging Iran to trade properly with the West, and a lot falls from that. She will know that the special purpose vehicle, Instex, created by the E3, which was discussed by my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, with our interlocutors at the Foreign Affairs Council on Monday, is about to go live, and I discussed it when I was in Tehran recently with my interlocutors. They have a sense of frustration that this needs to be up and running so that we can start actually doing business through this, and then that they can get some of what they want based around the necessities of daily life, which people in Iran at the moment are being deprived of because of sanctions. So I'm hopeful this will work. I'm hopeful that in the next few days and very few weeks, Instex will be up and running, and Iran will therefore see that good behaviour actually can be rewarded, and that in the fullness of time, this can be used to perhaps reintroduce, in a small way, Iran to a proper international discourse and dialogue, which at the moment, I'm afraid, is severely bruited and bruised.
Richard Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think you spoke for many, if not all of us, who visited Richard Radcliffe during his hunger strike and met, I think, even more of his family possibly than you did, Mr. Speaker. I think his brother was there on the day that I was there. So can I thank the Minister, too, for the tone that he's adopted in tackling this issue. And I congratulate, obviously, Nazneen's Member of Parliament, the Honourable Member for Hampstead and Kilburn, on raising the issue again. The difficulty, surely, is that this is wrapped up in a complicated scenario that involves so many different things that have nothing to do with the particular issues that Mrs. Radcliffe's case involved. And my honourable friend, the Minister, will, of course, know that she's not the only British prisoner at the moment in Iran, and nor are there only British prisoners in Iranian jails. So would my honourable friend confirm that the widest possible issue about the way in which some elements in Iran appear to be damaging that country's reputation by using hostages as a sort of political weapon, not just with us but with other countries, is really very sadly letting down the reputation of Iran across the world?
I entirely agree with my honourable friend. He refers to other dual nationals that we are concerned about. We have to be a little careful, because not all of the families of those dual nationals seek to advance cases publicly. And we must be led by them in their desire on how we approach this. This is a sensitive matter, and it's an individual matter, and we need to ensure that our approach to each one of those cases is bespoke, and that's what we will continue to do. But in terms of Iran's overall reputation, not just in this country, but in other countries, since this will involve other countries too, I would say that now is the time to take a different approach to this particular case, because it is very high profile, much more so than the other cases that we're dealing with at the moment. And if it can make progress with this case in the way that I have described, I think Iran's reputation, which sadly in the international community at the moment is not great, will improve significantly. It can do itself a whole lot of good by adopting a far more positive and humane approach to this particular case. I'd urge it to do so.
Tracy Brabin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So occasionally people say, what do MPs actually do for the money that we spend on them? But can I say, this is exactly what MPs should be doing, and congratulate my friend and colleague for continually raising this. I too had the privilege of spending time with Richard and his mum and sister, and speaking to them, I can only understand that as every hour goes by that your child is separated from you, undergoing who knows what, it must feel like a week. So my question to the Minister, who I think has made a very reasoned and determined reply to the urgent question, can he reassure us that these changes at the very top for Prime Minister won't affect his department's determination? And with the long recess approaching, can he reassure us that that work will continue at the pace with which he wishes? Very good point.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for that. I don't anticipate moving, touch wood. And the Honourable Lady can be absolutely sure that this is right at the top of my list of priorities. So come what may, in the words of the Vicar of Bray, I hope very much that I will be here ensuring that this remains absolutely top priority, this and other dual national cases. But for reasons I've described, this one has particular poignancy, and I will continue to do what I can with my Iranian interlocutors to bring this to a satisfactory conclusion. She can be sure of that.
Chris Bryant.
I'm not sure the Vicar of Bray is the right person to be citing, because he changed his religion whenever the regime changed, as I remember. And actually, the Minister has proved himself so far to be remarkably measured and sensible in everything he's said today. Despite all the human rights abuses in Iran, the truth is that Islam at its best can be a religion of phenomenal humanity, generosity and magnanimity. And I think that's what we're hoping for at this moment, isn't it? I just wonder whether there aren't other envoys that we might be sending from this country, perhaps from the church or on an interfaith basis, who might be able to speak of that humanity, compassion and magnanimity and be able to bring about the result that we all earnestly hope for.
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. He is far better qualified to talk about the Vicar of Bray than I am. Believe me, it is a compliment. I'm paying him a compliment, noting his previous occupation. He makes a serious suggestion, and I think that is one that is worth considering by all involved in this. It is the case that we have lost no opportunity to raise these dual national cases with those who we have been given access to at ministerial level and others over the course of this sorry saga. We'll continue to do so. But of course, people need to articulate their concerns, and that's not confined to ministers. National leaders of various sorts have commented on this, and if they can use any influence they can with their contacts in Tehran, I think that would be a very positive thing, and I welcome his suggestion.
Harry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister may not know that I am a man of faith, a person of faith. I have been the Parliamentary Church Warden in days ago by, and a lay canon at Wakefield Cathedral, and an active member of Christians in Parliament. I'm going to say, I don't want to say anything that would put Nazanin in any more problems that she has. I snuck into my friend's constituency the other day and just stood as a silent vigil outside the Iranian embassy, and I found that useful for me, that, you know, and I would like other members of Parliament to join me and go back and regularly do that in a quiet, respectful way, just to keep it going after the hunger strike finished. But can I also say that we must appeal, I think, to the Iranians in terms of faith. The fact of the matter is, why don't we persuade the Archbishop of Canterbury to lead an all-faith group to Iran to see, you know, to appeal to the better natures of very religious people to see that this is a travesty of faith and a travesty of justice?
Well, I hope very much that the Archbishop of Canterbury is listening to the honourable gentleman, and that perhaps he might consider whether or not he or other faith leaders have a role to play in this matter. I'm not sure whether the established church is the best vehicle, but I think it is universally recognised as being positive and capable of talking to people of all faiths and none. And my view in this matter is that dialogue is necessary, notwithstanding the nature of the individuals that we know are intimately connected with this case in Tehran, who have not in the past shown themselves to be the masters of dialogue.
Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, can I just first of all start by commending my right honourable friend for bringing this urgent question today and the way she champions her constituents' case. I also just wanted to say that the honourable members for the Rhondda and for Huddersfield make a really important point about looking at other ways of trying to put pressure onto the Iranian authorities. And I wanted to ask the Minister, who I think is a very good Minister, what more can the Foreign and Commonwealth Office do to coordinate not just the diplomatic pressure that needs to be applied, but the wider pressure that can come from society, the churches and other faiths? Why is the Foreign and Commonwealth Office not doing that? Because from the answer the Minister just gave, it sounded like that wasn't something that was underway.
Minister. I'm always open to suggestion. However, considering the matter in the few minutes I've had available to me to do so in respect of the Church of England, I think we need just to be a little bit careful because Iran is inherently suspicious of this country. If she doubts that, perhaps she might like to refer to Jack Straw's very excellent book that has only just been published. I would commend it to all honourable and right honourable members who take an interest in these matters. So there's a long-standing suspicion of this country in Tehran, and there will be a suspicion of any initiative that is prompted or engineered by the UK government. But I think it would be certainly open to organisations who are held in some esteem in Tehran to speak with any interlocutors that they are able to identify and have access to in Iran in order to put pressure on what they can and bring their good counsel to bear in respect of this case and other cases relating to dual nationals.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This case is clearly of deep concern, and particularly the developments we've heard in the last 24 hours to the whole country, and particularly heartbreaking to Richard Radcliffe and his family. And I could only describe Richard as a very gracious individual in meeting him. I want to ask the Minister not just what his office is doing, but the way that the Prime Minister's office is responding to this. The Prime Minister has just 1 week in office. Will she mobilise all the forces of her office, including, if necessary, and if possible, making a diplomatic visit to Iran in the time that she has got left, to make it her priority to see the release of this mother and wife?
Well, I'm confident that this has been a high priority for the Prime Minister. She has spoken to President Rouhani about this. It's a high priority for my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, who is frequently in touch with his interlocutors in this matter, and it's a high priority for me, as I have explained and will continue to be. The issue with Iran is very often access and getting it. And it can't be taken for granted that access is automatically welcomed or indeed provided. But I hope very much that we will continue to be able to press this case with those who are in a position to influence the outcome. And I've described in my remarks how sometimes it's quite difficult to identify those who are actually in a position to make a decision or are able to determine this particular matter. It is not as if one was approaching a Western liberal democracy. Things operate very differently in Tehran, I fear.
Alison Thewlis.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would like to send my solidarity and that of my constituents in Glasgow Central who contact me regularly on this issue, to Nazanin and to her family. I also have a number of constituents who are awaiting decisions from the Home Office on asylum issues and other issues who are Iranian nationals. And I would like to ask if there has been any updated advice given by the FCO to his colleagues in the Home Office about how those cases should be treated in light of the very serious situations that are emerging in Iran, because I would not want for any of my constituents to be returned to Iran by the Home Office to face similar situations as Nazanin and others have faced. And I would ask him to, either if he has not, to speak to his colleagues in the Home Office and make sure that there is something in place to protect everybody in those circumstances.
Well, as you will know, each asylum case is treated on its own merits in the light of prevailing circumstances. So I can't comment, obviously, because I don't know the individual cases to which she refers. But I do know that each one of them is individually treated by the Home Office, and a determination is made according to the perceived risk that they face, and clearly that will alter with time.
The Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I too thank the Minister for his tone this afternoon, but can I press him to agree, no ifs or buts, but when the incoming Prime Minister joins us, that he must make Nazanin's release an absolute priority. And I say gently and genuinely that should that Prime Minister be the member for Uxbridge, how do we ensure that he's appropriately briefed on Nazanin's current situation, so that it is imperative, I hope he agrees, that we avoid any repeat of earlier blunders?
Well, I know both of my right honourable friends are greatly exercised by this case, and I can assure her they are extremely well read into it now. And I am absolutely confident that whatever the outcome next week, the Prime Minister will treat this case with the priority that I think it deserves. But if I can reassure her, I shall be there, inshallah, prompting them to ensure that this matter has the highest priority.
Thank you. Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I too stand in solidarity with Richard and his family and everybody here in this House today to say we need Nazanin home now. Mr. Speaker, when Nazanin's father rushed to see his daughter in her hospital bed, his access was blocked by the Revolutionary Guard, which is a shocking turn of events which has affected all of us here. All of Nazanin's family, including her sister-in-law Rebecca, who lives in my constituency of Newport West, are going through hell as her situation deteriorates. When is this government going to explore new ways to get Nazanin home safely and as quickly as possible?
I do share the Honourable Lady's frustration. I really do. I want this brought to a conclusion as soon as possible. She has to appreciate, though, that the United Kingdom has a limited number of tools in its toolbox, and that's part of our frustration. I would love to be able to resolve this tomorrow. All we can do is what we do diplomatically, and that is to put pressure on our interlocutors and try to explain to them what the benefits are, not only for the individuals concerned, but for the country concerned too, of bringing this to a satisfactory resolution. This truly is a win-win situation. It is clearly a win for Nazanin and her family that she should be released as soon as possible, and it's a win too for the reputation of Iran.
Mr. Philip Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I congratulate my honourable friend for the manner in which he's conducted his response to this urgent question, and for the widespread support across the House for the humanitarian challenge that is before us, and particularly before the Radcliffe family. But could I also ask him to agree with me that this is not the time or place for any attempts across the House, however gently put, to try to seek party political advantage or division as a result of changes in the Conservative leadership. This is not the time. We should be focusing, all of us, on ensuring that Nazanin can be returned to this country and doing whatever we can to ensure that we make representations to the right people in Iran to secure her release, irrespective of other political events surrounding our relationship with Iran.
Of course, I agree with my right honourable friend, and I recall the remarks you made, Mr. Speaker, a few minutes earlier about this sort of issue meaning that the House is acting at its best, that we're not being partisan, that we're clearly focused on the interests of Nazanin and other dual nationals. That's where we need to be focused. And I would urge right honourable members to approach these matters in that light and the manner in which you rightly alluded.
Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's good to know that the Minister feels secure in his post, but with all respect to him, Nazanin's fate has been tied very much to the person of the Foreign Secretary, current and previous, for good and ill. I'm not asking him to predict who will be the Foreign Secretary in a week's time, but will he assure us that all eventualities are being planned for in the Foreign Office so that this matter remains at the top of the agenda and we don't have any more confusion and delay?
Yes, I'm not sure I would associate myself with the sense of security to which he referred, but nevertheless, I can assure him that this matter is right at the top of the priority of the department that I have the honour of being a minister within, and that will endure. And I've sought to explain to the House today that whatever the outcome next week, I'm confident that it will also continue to be high priority for number 10.
Thank you. Yes, I will, because I think it appertains to our current exchanges. Yes. Point of order, Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you've already indulged me today, so I hope you'll indulge me a little bit further while I read out a message from Richard Radcliffe, my constituent, who says that on behalf of Nazanin's whole family, I want to thank the Speaker and the House from the bottom of my heart for the support, compassion and empathy that you have shown us in these troubled times. We won't stop fighting for her release, and I hope that the House won't stop either. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, it was unsolicited, but it is greatly appreciated. Greatly appreciated. We won't let go. I think there is a pact between us on this matter. Thank you. Just before we come to the next urgent question, which is that of the Shadow Home Secretary, I have to notify the House, in accordance with the Royal Assent Act 1967, that Her Majesty has signified her royal assent to the following Act: Supply and Appropriation (brackets main estimates) close bracket Act 2019. Order. Urgent question, Diane Abbott.
To ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department if he will make a statement on immigration detention and victims of modern slavery.
Minister Caroline Knowles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Modern slavery is an abhorrent crime, and this government is determined to stamp it out. In my role as Immigration Minister, I am especially aware of the shocking exploitation of vulnerable individuals from overseas who are duped by the promise of a better life in the UK, only to be trafficked and sold into modern slavery. Identifying and protecting victims of such crimes is a priority. In October 2017, we announced an ambitious package of reforms to the National Referral Mechanism. As well as improving the support on offer, these reforms are intended to provide quicker and more certain decision-making in which victims can have confidence. But I must make clear that being recognised as a victim of modern slavery does not automatically result in being granted immigration status in the UK. There may be victims of modern slavery who have no lawful basis to remain and for whom support is available to leave the UK voluntarily. Mr. Speaker, it is important we recognise the role of our immigration policies, and while we are committed to supporting individuals to leave voluntarily, including with reintegration support, there may be occasions where, having exhausted all options and refusing to leave, we are faced with the difficult decision of detaining people to secure their return. I want to reassure the House that we do not take these decisions lightly, but it may be necessary to detain an individual even if they are vulnerable to effect their removal. Where that is the case, we seek to keep the period of detention as short as possible and place their welfare and safeguarding at the heart of what we do. The Home Secretary made clear his commitment to going further and faster with reforms to immigration detention, including by reducing the number of people we detain, increasing the number of voluntary returns, and by working with partners on alternatives to detention. We have made real progress in delivering these commitments. A number of women who had otherwise been detained are now being managed in the community, and other pilots will begin later this year. Mr. Speaker, as we approach the first anniversary of Stephen Shaw's second independent review into immigration detention, it is important to take stock of how far we have come, while acknowledging that there is much more to do to ensure our approach to immigration detention is fair and humane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this question. On June the 19th this year, the Immigration Minister provided a written answer on the possible immigration detention of persons who are in fact victims of modern slavery. And the written answer read as follows: there is no central record of such persons. The Home Office therefore does not collate or publish the data requested. But we now learn from Freedom of Information requests by the Independent newspaper that is not the case. From the